My name is Lena Hartwell. I'm 29 years old. When I was 22, my mother stood at a podium in front of 150 relatives at my brother's law school graduation party and tapped her champagne glass until the room went quiet. She smiled at my brother the way people smile at things they've spent their whole lives building. Then she said, "We made a lot of sacrifices for this family, but some investments pay off, and some teach you that not everyone is built for greatness." She laughed. My uncle laughed. My brother laughed, the way you laugh when you're the one holding the trophy. I was standing near the kitchen doorway of my parents' house, holding a plate I hadn't eaten from, and I felt something in my chest go very still. I set the plate down on the counter, I picked up my keys, and I walked out the front door of 38 Aldercroft Lane, Naperville, Illinois, and I did not go back. Not for 5 years. Then, 8 weeks ago, my cousin sent me a voicemail I almost deleted. She said 4 words before I hung up. "He lost everything, Lena." She didn't explain what kind of everything. She didn't have to. What she didn't know was that I'd spent those 5 years becoming someone completely untouchable by that house and everyone in it. What she also didn't know was that the brother they polished and presented to the world like a first-place ribbon had come undone so completely that I would be the only person left who could tell him the truth about why. Let me take you back. The Hartwell family, 38 Aldercroft Lane, Naperville, Illinois. Colonial two-story, cream siding, black shutters, a wraparound front porch my father power-washed every April. My father worked in corporate insurance. My mother ran the household the way a CEO runs a company. Quarterly reviews, performance expectations, clear org chart. 2 kids. From the outside, church potlucks, neighborhood block parties, the family that always brought the nicest dish. From the inside, a measurement system with exactly 2 results: pass or fail. My brother Nathan was born in 1990. I came along in 1994, 4 years and an entirely different galaxy of treatment. Nathan graduated top of his class at Naperville North. I graduated with a 3.1 and a part-time job at a fabric store I'd worked at since sophomore year. Nathan got a full academic scholarship to University of Illinois. I was told, the August before my senior year, that there was some money set aside for me and that I should look at community college first to see how serious I was. I took out $19,400 in loans for 2 years at a state school and never asked them for a dollar. Nathan went straight to Northwestern Law after undergrad. I finished a business degree and got a job as an administrative coordinator at a logistics company in downtown Chicago at $36,000 a year. My mother described this at a family dinner as a good starter position, and then immediately turned to ask Nathan how his moot court team was doing. The dinner table thing started when I was 12, and I didn't have language for it until I was 26, and sitting across from a therapist in Portland, Oregon, describing it out loud for the first time. Every Sunday, same seats, Nathan to my father's right, me across the table, closest to the kitchen so I could help my mother bring things in without interrupting the conversation. My father would ask Nathan about his classes, his friends, his plans, his opinions on things. Then he'd glance at me during a pause the way you glance at the window when you're really watching the door. "How's work, Lena?" Not curious. Placeholder. Like saying grace before a meal you didn't cook and don't plan to eat slowly. I started a notes app on my phone when I was 20. I needed to put things somewhere they couldn't be rewritten. How many times in a month my father said Nathan's name versus mine? 17 to 4 over 3 months. How many times my mother told me she'd get back to me on something I'd asked and never did? 22. How many times she changed the subject from something I'd said to something about Nathan mid-sentence? 9. I kept adding to it. Numbers felt like proof. I needed proof of things I was starting to wonder if I'd imagined. College admissions told the whole story in one season. Nathan's process: my parents hired a college counselor at $30,200, drove him to 4 campus visits, printed his essays, proofread them as a family the way people do puzzles together, slow and involved and warm. My process: I asked once if someone could read my Common App essay. My mother said she trusted me. She said it while loading the dishwasher. She didn't turn around. I submitted everything from my laptop in my bedroom, an 11 by 10 room with a twin bed I'd had since I was 8, a desk from a garage sale my parents had painted over in a color I didn't choose, and a window that faced the neighbor's fence. Nathan's room, 15 by 14, a loft bed his freshman year that my dad built with him over a weekend, a proper desk from Pottery Barn that my mother had driven to pick up because she'd read that better workspace ergonomics improved GPA outcomes. I asked in 10th grade if we could get a new desk for my room. Mine wobbled. My mother looked at me and said, "We're in the middle of Nathan's application, sweetheart. Let's revisit." We never revisited. The night that ended my life in that house was June 3rd, 2018. Nathan had passed the Illinois bar. He'd just accepted an offer at a mid-sized firm in Chicago. My parents threw a party at the house. Catered appetizers, rented stemware, a tent in the backyard, 150 people. My mother's idea of casual. They'd contributed heavily to Nathan's law school costs. I knew because my mother referenced the number twice at that party, once to the neighbors and once to my aunt. The way people reference a good investment when the stock finally pays. I'd driven 40 minutes from my apartment in Pilsen to be there. I'd bought a bottle of wine and a card that I'd spent 20 minutes writing something real in. My mother called for attention around 7:30. The tent went quiet. She was good at rooms, always had been. She had the kind of posture that made people straighten up without meaning to. She thanked everyone for coming. She talked about hard work. She talked about sacrifice. Then she said, "We raised 2 children in this house. I want to be honest with you all. We knew pretty early on which one was going to make us proud. And tonight, watching Nathan receive his bar results, I have to say we were right to put everything into the one who could carry it." Laughter. Warm, generous, champagne-loosened laughter. My uncle clapped. My father beamed. Nathan shook his head like he was embarrassed, but he was smiling the way you smile when someone says exactly what you'd hoped they'd say out loud. I was near the kitchen doorway. I had been near the kitchen doorway the entire night, filling trays, helping with drinks, the role I'd been assigned without anyone assigning it. I heard every word. Every person in that tent understood what she meant. I watched 3 people near me exchange a glance. My mother raised her glass. To Nathan, the one we never doubted. More applause. I counted to 8 before I moved. Then I walked to the kitchen, set my wine glass in the sink, took my jacket off the hook by the back door, and walked out to the driveway. I sat in my car for 11 minutes. I know it was 11 because I stared at the dashboard clock and I needed something exact to hold on to. Nobody came out to check on me. Not in 11 minutes, not in 12. I drove back to Pilsen. 40 minutes, empty Sunday highway, no radio. I checked my phone at every red light. 0 messages. When I got home, I sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the lower cabinets and cried until I couldn't produce anything else. And then I opened my phone and I blocked every number in my family contacts. My parents. Nathan. My aunt who had laughed. My uncle who had clapped. All of it. I changed my number 2 weeks later. I deactivated Instagram. I made my Facebook private and removed every family connection. I left the family group chat in the middle of the night when I knew no one would see it in real time. I kept 2 people. My cousin Faye, who had texted me at 7:41 that evening before I'd even left, "Are you okay?" That was a lot. And my coworker Jess, who knew enough of the backstory to not make me explain it from the beginning every time. That was my people. 2. It was enough. It had to be. The year after, I moved. Chicago to Portland, Oregon. I'd applied for a position at a supply chain tech company without telling anyone. Senior coordinator, $52,000, health insurance, a team that didn't know anything about me before I walked in. I drove out alone in a rented truck in January 2010, 1,200 miles, Oregon plates by February. My first apartment in Portland, the Sellwood neighborhood, 720 square feet, $1,380 a month, hardwood floors, a deep kitchen sink I loved irrationally. I painted the bedroom a dark, dusty blue the first weekend because I'd always wanted a dark wall and no one could tell me the deposit mattered more than what I needed to feel at home in a space that was mine. I started therapy that March. Dr. Albright, Thursday evenings, $95 a session after insurance. First session, she asked what brought me in. I thought about it for a while. I need to stop waiting for a version of my family that isn't coming, I said. She nodded. She didn't write anything yet. She just said, "Tell me what you've been waiting for." That was the beginning of actually looking at it. I built the years carefully. Promotions, operations lead by 2020, supply chain manager by 2022, $71,000 by the time I was 28. I paid off my student loans in full on a Thursday afternoon in March 2022. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at the confirmation on my screen for a long time. I thought about the $19,400. Every cent of it borrowed and repaid alone, not $1 from Naperville. I cried, but not because I was sad, because it was completely mine, in a way that nothing on Aldercroft Lane had ever been mine. I made real friends. My neighbor Tamsin, who knocked on my door 6 months after I moved in to ask if I wanted to split a CSA box because it was too much produce for one person. My coworker Dario, who walked with me to lunch most days and never asked intrusive questions and made me feel like my pace of conversation was the right one. My running partner Gwen, from a Saturday morning group I joined for something to do outside. She had grown up in a family that had its own complicated taxonomy, and we'd figured that out about each other slowly, the way you figure things out when you're not performing normalcy. These people became my architecture. I dated, carefully, then more easily, a few months at a time, nothing serious for a long time. Then in 2023, someone named Joel, 34, high school history teacher, patient in a specific way I had not encountered before. He noticed details. One evening at dinner, he said, "You ask for permission before you share an opinion. Did you know you do that?" I set my fork down. He said, "You say, I don't know if this is right, but before almost every perspective you offer." I sat with that for a week, brought it to Dr. Albright. We spent 3 sessions unpacking it, peeling back why I'd been taught that my perspective was provisional, something to hedge before presenting, a rough draft that needed someone else's approval to count. Joel and I ended in December 2023, not badly, just timing and honesty about where we each were. But he'd handed me something I kept, the awareness that I was still completing sentences in my head with my mother's voice. By early 2024, I felt rebuilt in most of the places that had needed it: my dusty blue wall, my Thursday sessions, Gwen's 7 a.m. Saturday runs along the Springwater corridor. The job I'd grown into, I'd started going whole weeks without thinking about Naperville. I thought the distance had finally calcified into something permanent and structurally sound. Then on a Wednesday evening in February 2025 at 6:18 p.m., while I was eating leftover soup and reading with half attention, my phone showed a voicemail from Faye, Naperville area code. I hadn't spoken to her in 8 months. I listened to 4 words before I stopped it. "He lost everything, Lena." I put my phone face down on the table. I finished the soup. I did the dishes. I wiped the counter. Then I picked up the phone and called her back. Nathan's wife had left him in October 2024. Faye hesitated on the details and I asked directly. She exhaled. Nathan had made a series of financial decisions the firm hadn't sanctioned, not illegal but reckless, and when they came to light through a client complaint, the firm had parted ways with him in August. He hadn't told anyone for 6 weeks. He'd continued leaving the house every morning at the same time, coming home at the same time, keeping the architecture of the life exactly in place while it was already emptied out. When his wife found the termination paperwork, the whole picture collapsed at once. She'd given him the chance to get help. He hadn't taken it. She left. Filed in November. "Where is he now?" I asked. "He's staying with your parents," Faye said. "He's been there since November. Lena, I saw him last month." She stopped. "He doesn't look like himself. He's not eating right. He barely talks. He's sitting in that house and your parents are covering for him. Your dad called around to some colleagues to see about positions. Your mom told the neighbors he's between firms by choice, exploring partnership opportunities." Her voice dropped. "They're building the story again. They're not getting him any help." I felt my jaw tighten, building the story. Of course, the Hartwells of Aldercroft Lane, the family that always brought the nicest dish, a son who had failed publicly didn't fit the presentation, so they'd rebuild a presentation around the failure. Box it in, paint over it, keep the shutters clean. "Why are you calling me?" I said. "I've been out of contact for 5 years. Nathan knows I blocked everyone." Faye was quiet for a moment. Then he asks about you. That sat differently than I expected. "He's asked me twice in the last year," she said. "He thinks you chose this. He thinks you were done with him specifically. He told me. Lena, he said he thinks you were embarrassed by him." Why would I be embarrassed by Nathan? That's what your parents told him, that you'd had a falling out with the family because you found the dynamic embarrassing, that you'd wanted to distance yourself from the pressure of expectations. She paused. They told him it was your choice and your issue and that you'd reach out when you were ready. They made it sound like you left because of something about you. I set down my glass. They told him it was my issue. Yes. They turned me leaving into a character flaw of mine. Yes. I ended the call gently, not in anger, just because I needed to breathe without someone on the other end. I sat on my couch in Portland with my hands in my lap and looked at the dusty blue wall and let myself feel the full shape of it. 5 years. He had spent 5 years thinking I'd found him wanting, thinking my silence was a verdict on him, not knowing that I'd left because of what my mother said into a microphone in front of his whole life about me. I called Dr. Albright's line. We talked for 35 minutes. She asked me the question she always asks when I'm at a threshold. "What do you owe them?" "Nothing," I said. "Then what is this?" Long pause. "I think this is about whether I can go back into that house and still know who I am when I come out." She didn't answer. She'd learned by then that I usually answer my own questions if she gives me enough silence. 4 days later, I called my mother. Her number was 5 years old in my restored contacts, and when it connected on the second ring, her voice was exactly the same. Measured. A half-second of controlled composure before she spoke. "Lena." Not a question, not surprise. Just the performance of having expected this. "I heard about Nathan." "Who told you?" "It doesn't matter. Tell me what's actually happening." What followed was 18 minutes of the careful version. Exploring options. Taking stock. A period of recalibration. I interrupted once. Then again, the second time I said, "Mom, has Nathan been out of work for 6 months?" Silence. "Yes." "Have you left the house in the last 2 weeks?" Another pause. Another, regularly. "Has anyone suggested he speak to someone professionally?" The longest pause. "Your father feels Nathan needs stability right now, not to be a vet handled." I closed my eyes. Nathan is in a mental health crisis that's not handling him, that's looking at what's in the room. We don't know that it's you do know. You've been managing the optics and he's been sitting in your house disappearing. You called his colleagues, you built a story. You've been protecting the Hartwell name and he's been getting worse. Her voice tightened. "I don't think you have the full picture." "I have enough of it." I kept my voice level, even, "Tell me something." After the graduation party, the toast, "Did you tell Nathan why I stopped being in contact?" Silence. "Mom, we told him you needed space from the family dynamic. You told him it was about me." We simplified. "You told him his sister left because she had a problem with expectations. You made my absence into my flaw. For 5 years, he's been carrying that. While everything in his life was falling apart, he thought his sister had quietly decided he wasn't worth staying for. We didn't want to." "Did he ever try to reach me in the early months?" The silence that followed was different, more careful. The kind of pause that is itself an answer. "How?" He, there was an email. Early on, he asked us if we had a new address or contact for you. We told him we didn't. Another pause. "And that perhaps it was best to respect your need for space." I put the phone against my chest and breathed for 10 seconds. They'd intercepted it. Not with technology this time, just with the same tool they'd always used, the managed narrative. Nathan had reached out and they had redirected him, quietly, into a version of the story where my door was closed by my own hand. 5 years of silence built on a single lie they'd repeated until it became the architecture of his understanding. Here's what's going to happen, I said when I brought the phone back up. I'm coming to Naperville. I'm going to see Nathan. If he's willing to get help, real help, a therapist, a structured program, whatever he needs, I'm going to help him find it and get there. You and Dad are going to pay for all of it. That is not a request. You're going to stay out of the treatment decisions. You don't get to frame this, approve this, or manage how it looks from the outside. You write the check and you step back. If Nathan decides later that he wants you involved in his recovery, that's entirely his call to make. But you don't get to run this one. You've been running it long enough. My mother was quiet for a moment. Then, we're his parents. I know, and you told 150 people at a party that you put everything into Nathan because he was the one worth it, and then you told Nathan that I left because I had a problem with expectations, so right now, we're his parents is not a credential that opens any doors. Have your card ready. I'll send the details. I booked a flight. Portland to Chicago Thursday morning, $218 round trip. I packed for 2 nights and told myself I wasn't staying beyond one. I texted Faye, coming Thursday. She texted back a single word, good. I told Tamsin and Dario and Gwen in broad terms where I was going. Tamsin said, protect your energy. Dario said, text me when you land. Gwen said, you've already done the hard work. This is just showing up. I landed at O'Hare at 11:50 a.m. I rented a car. I drove to Naperville first because I needed to stand in front of my parents in person before I saw my brother. I needed to look at the house and know it couldn't hold me anymore. 38 Aldercroft Lane. The porch was the same. The shutters were freshly painted. A small ceramic planter by the front step that hadn't been there before, something my mother had probably read about in a home magazine. A curated detail, a house that had spent 30 years presenting itself as evidence of something. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She'd been watching from the window. She looked smaller than I remembered. There were new lines near her mouth, at her temples. She reached toward me when I stepped inside, and I moved past the gesture and walked into the hallway. My father was in the living room, the same armchair he'd always occupied, angled toward the TV the way it always had been, tuned toward whatever he'd been watching before she'd called him in for this. He stood when I entered, 6'2", heavier now, still with the bearing of a man who had decided long ago that he was reasonable. Lena, he said. Dad, I said. I sat on the couch without taking off my coat. I made them tell me the real version. My mother talked to her hands. My father told it the way he told everything. Sequence, outcome, next step. The early signs they'd attributed to work stress. The client complaint. The termination they'd been called about directly, which told me they'd known the full story for 6 months before Faye called me. The wife's call to my mother. My father pulling strings with 2 former colleagues, neither of whom had come through with anything. The story they'd built for the neighbors. The word sabbatical used at church. You've known for 6 months, I said. We were trying to. You were trying to keep it contained. You built a story. You called in favors to pass the presentation, and he's been sitting in your guest room for 4 months losing himself. My father's jaw set. We were protecting our son. You were protecting your name. I looked at them both. I need to say something, and I need you to actually hear it, not correct it, not contextualize it, just hear it. Neither of them spoke. At Nathan's graduation party, you stood in front of 150 people and said that you had known early on which of your children was going to make you proud, that you had put everything into the one who could carry it. I was by the kitchen doorway. I had been helping all evening. I heard you say out loud in front of my entire extended family that I was the one you hadn't bet on, the one who didn't get the investment, the one who was, by implication, the proof of nothing. My voice was steady. I had practiced this in too many therapy sessions for it not to be steady. I drove 40 minutes to be there. I bought wine, I helped all evening, and I walked out of that tent knowing exactly what my mother thought of me in front of everyone who mattered to her. My mother was looking at the floor. My father sat very still. You told Nathan I left because I had a problem with expectations. You intercepted his attempt to reach me and told him to respect my space. You built a version of the story where my disappearance was my dysfunction. And for 5 years, while his marriage was straining and his career was fraying and he was running out of ways to be the person you built him to be, he thought his sister had quietly decided he wasn't worth knowing. I stood. I'm not here for an apology. I'm not here for an apology. I'm not here because I've forgiven you. I'm here for Nathan. After he's stable, I'll make my own decisions about what comes next with you. But today, you need to hear the real version, not the one you've been living inside. I left them in that living room and drove 12 minutes to the house. Nathan answered the door on the third knock. He looked like someone had been gradually turning down the brightness on him for months. He'd lost weight, not dramatically, but enough that his clothes sat differently. His face was unshaved. His eyes had the particular flatness that I had learned, in other contexts, to recognize as someone who had been indoors and alone for too long, running on too little of anything real. He stared at me for a long moment. You're here, he said. Not a question, not quite disbelief, something in between. I'm here. He stepped back and let me in. The guest room they'd set him up in was neat in a surface way, bed made, bag in the corner, but the neatness had the quality of someone going through motions without caring about the outcome. He sat on the edge of the bed. I pulled the desk chair around and sat across from him. Mom called you, he said. Faye called me first, then I called Mom. He looked at his hands. I should have told people sooner, the job, everything. Maybe, but I'm more interested in what's happening now. He was quiet for a while. Then, I thought you left because of me. Because I let them. Because I was the reason they did what they did to you and I never said anything. And eventually you just decided I wasn't worth the proximity. I left because of what Mom said at your party. He looked up. The toast? She told 150 people she'd known early which child was worth investing in. I was standing by the kitchen door. He closed his eyes. I heard it differently when it was happening. I thought she was just, I let myself hear it differently. He exhaled. I've been doing that my whole life, hearing things the way it was easier to hear them. I know, I said. I think we were both doing different versions of the same thing. He looked at me for a long moment. I tried to email you. Early on, maybe 6 months after you went quiet. I know, Mom told me what happened to it. Something shifted in his face. The same expression I hadn't been able to name on the drive over. Something underneath the performance of having it together. Something young and tired and relieved to stop holding the shape. You thought I chose not to answer, I said. For 5 years. For 5 years, I said. And I thought you'd been there when she said it and hadn't come after me. We let that sit, the truth of it between us, not comfortable but real. The kind of thing that takes up space for a long time and has to be moved around, not removed. What is it like, I asked him eventually, being the one they bet on? He looked at his hands again. Like being a prototype, he said. Like your proof of their theory about themselves. Every grade, every win, every right move, it wasn't mine, it was evidence. And when the evidence stopped adding up, he stopped. I didn't know how to be the version of myself that wasn't performing the theory. I've been doing it since I was 11. I don't actually know who I am when I'm not trying to prove something to them. I thought about my notes app, my 17 to 4 count. The way I'd needed numbers because feelings could be questioned and numbers couldn't. I was angry at you, I said, for not following me out that night, for laughing, for going to their brunch the next morning and sending me a text 3 days later that said, "Hope you're good," like I'd had a headache. He winced. But I also know you were raised in the same house I was. Different role, different damage. The damage was still real. He looked at me, really looked. Not the practiced, composed look I'd grown up watching, something unguarded. I'm sorry, he said, for not following you out. For every time I made their version of you easier to maintain by not contradicting it, I let them do that. I let them do it because it was easier and because I was scared to disrupt the system I was at the center of. I didn't rush past it. I let it land. Let it be real. I found some options, I said. There's an outpatient therapy program through a practice in Chicago, evidence-based, structured, a psychiatrist on staff for evaluation, group and individual sessions. There's also a residential program in Wisconsin, 90 days, for people dealing with identity collapse after high-pressure careers. Seriously good clinical staff. I spoke to the intake coordinator this morning. She's expecting a call. I held his gaze. Mom and Dad are covering it. That's already settled. You don't have to think about the money or what they'll think or what story they'll tell the neighbors. You just have to tell me which one fits what you actually need. He was quiet, long enough that I sat with the possibility of no. Then he said, I don't know what I need. I haven't known what I actually need in so long I'm not sure I remember how to figure it out. That's what the program is for, I said. You don't have to know, you just have to go. He nodded, slowly, like it cost him something. I called the Wisconsin intake coordinator that afternoon. She had availability the following week. I took it. I drove Nathan to a hotel near O'Hare that evening. He wasn't staying in that house any longer than he needed to, and I wasn't offering the intimacy of my own space when we were this new at being honest with each other. We ate room service soup and bread, and he told me things about the last 2 years. The client situation, which was more about exhaustion and recklessness than malice. The marriage, which had been two people performing a life neither had chosen carefully. The specific morning he'd woken up and realized he didn't know what he was going to do with a Tuesday that wasn't structured around proving something to someone. I listened. I didn't fix. I just let him talk. Around midnight, he said, I can't believe you came. I almost didn't, I said. He looked at me. I know. That's why it matters. Tuesday morning, I drove him to O'Hare at 5:45 a.m. Flight to Milwaukee at 7:10, facility transport from there. We stood at the security entrance and I handed him an envelope with the facility information, his insurance card, and 2 pages of notes I'd put together on what to expect the first week. He held it against his chest for a moment without opening it. Then he hugged me. His arms felt thin and he smelled like hotel soap over something stale that would take a long time to fully clear. I held on anyway. Are we going to be okay? He said into my shoulder. You and me? I thought about it honestly, the way Dr. Albright had taught me. Not hopefully, not protectively, honestly. I think we can become something real, I said. Not what we should have been. Something real from here. That's better anyway, he said. He picked up his bag. He turned once at the checkpoint and raised his hand. I raised mine. He went through. I watched until I couldn't see him anymore. That was 8 weeks ago. Nathan calls me on Sunday evenings. The program schedules calls at 6 p.m. Pacific, which works with my time zone. We talk for 40 minutes, sometimes an hour. The conversations are still careful, still feeling out the edges, but they belong to us, not to the story our parents built, not to the theory they needed us to prove. Just two people from the same house, different damage, trying to know each other for the first time without the performance. He's asked about our parents twice, what I think he should do when he gets out. I've told him both times that it's his to decide, his timeline, his terms, and I'll respect whatever he chooses. I'm not holding that verdict for him. My parents had sent 3 texts since the Tuesday I drove him to the airport. Short, asking for updates. I've given them the minimum. He's doing well. The program is good. Nothing more. My father sent a longer message 2 weeks ago. He said they'd like to talk when I was ready. I read it twice. I haven't responded. That's not avoidance. It's a decision I haven't finished making, and I'm allowing myself the time to make it correctly. My life in Portland is exactly as I left it. The dusty blue wall, the Saturday runs, Tamsin's standing offer of surplus CSA produce, which I now just expect on my doorstep every other Tuesday. My Thursday sessions with Dr. Albright, who asked me last week what I had learned about myself in all of this. I sat with it for a full minute before I answered. What I learned was that I could walk back into the thing that made me doubt myself and come out the other side still knowing who I was. I could sit in that living room, on that couch, across from the two people who had arranged my childhood around someone else's importance, and I could speak clearly, leave when I chose, and still find myself intact in the rental car on the way to the highway. That's not a small thing. That is, in fact, the whole thing. Nathan gets out in May. He's already been talking with his coordinator about next steps, something smaller than corporate litigation, something that belongs to him rather than to the version of him they built. He called last Sunday and said, "I've been thinking about what it meant that you showed up when you didn't have to." I told him I'd decided he was a person worth showing up for, separate from everything else. He said, "I want to learn how to be your brother." The real version. I said I wanted that too. Let's take it slow. People ask me sometimes, in my own head at 2 a.m., in therapy, in the quiet after a long run, whether I did the right thing, whether coming back meant forgiving or forgetting, or in some way approving of what had been done in that tent at that party on a June evening in Naperville. It meant none of those things. I went back because Nathan was someone worth reaching, not because the people who'd built the hierarchy deserved anything from me. I didn't go home. That house was never home in any way that counted. I went to find someone who had been set up to fail in a different direction than I had, and I drove him to the airport, and then I flew back to Portland and sat in my apartment with the dusty blue wall and the running shoes by the door and the life I had built from nothing, quietly, while nobody who should have been watching was paying any attention. My name is Lena Hartwell. I'm 29 years old. I was the one they didn't invest in. The kitchen doorway, the wobbling desk, the placeholder question at the dinner table. I built anyway. And if you are standing in your own doorway right now, watching someone else receive everything you were told wasn't yours to want, I need you to know that their accounting was wrong. It was always wrong. You don't need their correction. You need your own door. Go find it. I used to think the hardest thing was leaving. It wasn't. The hardest thing was staying gone long enough to become someone who could come back without losing herself in the process. When my mother tapped that champagne glass at Nathan's graduation party and said what she said in front of 150 people, she wasn't being careless. She was being honest in the way people are honest when they've never been asked to examine what they believe. She believed Nathan was the investment, and I was the remainder. She said it out loud because she'd said it to herself for so long, it stopped feeling like a verdict and started feeling like fact. That's what unchecked thinking does over years. It hardens into something that feels like the truth, even when it's just an old story nobody bothered to revise. What happened to Nathan wasn't punishment for being loved too much. It was the consequence of being built entirely around someone else's definition of success. He'd spent 30 years performing a theory, every grade, every case, every right move, a piece of evidence for their argument about themselves. And when the evidence stopped holding, he didn't have anything underneath it that was actually his. That's not a moral failing. That's what happens when nobody teaches you to know yourself separate from what you produce. You don't learn to be. You only learn to perform. And performance has a shelf life. What I built in Portland, the job I grew into, the friends I chose carefully, the Thursday sessions where I learned to say what I actually thought without prefacing it with an apology, none of it came from someone handing me a template. It came from having to figure out who I was when nobody was watching and nobody was grading it. That's not something I'd wish on anyone, but I'd also be lying if I said it didn't make me more honest about myself than I ever would have been otherwise. When you have no inherited structure to stand inside, you have to build your own. And everything you build, you understand from the foundation up. I think about the notes app I kept. 17 to 4. 22 times she said she'd get back to me. 9 mid-sentence redirections. I needed numbers because I needed proof that what I was experiencing was real and not a defect in my perception. That's what it does to you. Long term. Being treated as the afterthought teaches you to doubt your own accounting. The real work. The work Dr. Albright and I spent years on was learning to trust my own read on a room again. To offer an opinion without the hedge, To disagree without bracing for the consequence. Intelligence isn't just knowing things. It's trusting that your way of seeing is worth something even when no one in the room confirms it. And then there's the part I'm still learning, showing up anyway. Going back to that house, sitting across from my parents, saying the real version out loud without my voice shaking, that wasn't bravery in the dramatic sense. It was just the accumulation of enough small decisions made over enough years to have built a self that could withstand the original pressure without collapsing back into it. That's what persistence actually looks like. Not one dramatic moment, thousands of ordinary ones, paying the loans alone, painting the wall the color I wanted, answering honestly when Joel asked me why I hedged every opinion, calling Nathan because he was worth it, not because they deserved anything from me. My mother was wrong about the accounting. Nathan wasn't the investment and I wasn't the remainder. We were two people raised in the same house, shaped by the same pressure, damaged in different directions. What I know now is that the damage doesn't have the last word unless you let it. You can decide at any point that the story they told about you is just a story and start writing a different one. Not for them. Not to prove anything. Just because you're the only one who can.